I'm Drew Paine. I'm a user experience research lead in the scientific data division at Berkeley Lab. Um, I've come to Berkeley Lab and workflows in HPC from a socio-technical background. I have a PhD in human-centered design and engineering. And for my research, I've spent over a decade studying scientific collaboration and collaboration between scientists around computing and how they cooperatively work across different computing environments. So this has been a really fun conversation. At LBNL, I spend most of my time these days on a project called Strudel, which is working to make user experience and design more easily adoptable by scientific software teams. And then I also spend a lot of my time on the DOE High Performance Data Facility project, leading user experience and community outreach efforts in the early stages of that work. And then I'm also part of the NSF Cybersecurity Center of Excellence Trusted CI, working on the Secure by Design initiative there. Laila?
Hi, I'm Laila. I work on Galaxy. Galaxy is a platform for data-intensive scientific research. And we also support workflows and a visual workflow editor. Um, yeah, which is also what I'm going to talk about a bit today for some of the potential solutions and problems we're encountering with that.
Cool. Next slide, please. So we wanted to start providing a bit of context just on, and I'll say this is very much my and my team's view. It's kind of a soapbox for me, but on what user experience is and kind of how that's more than just user interfaces, especially more than just graphical user interfaces. So as a team here at LBNL in the Scientific Data Division, we've come to see or frame UX as the practice of developing services and products that provide consistent, relevant, productive, and joyful experiences for users. And consistent and relevant and productive probably aren't that controversial. If you're a scientist trying to do work, you want to be able to get that work done in an efficient manner with data and software that helps you. But also emphasizing joyful, just because if tools are hard to use or are dragging your workday down, that's not really helping your day, and that's not a great user experience. And part of why we talk about UX as something broader than just user interfaces is that user experience really does encompass a full user journey. So if you think about how you might come to find a new web service or a new application for your phone, there's that product discovery phase to an adoption and trialing phase, exploring the different interfaces that product offers. In the case of scientific software, that could range from command line interfaces, especially in HPC environments, to web-based graphical user interfaces, or even APIs with a lot of workflow systems. But you also don't want to forget, documentation as part of that experience. And part of what we also like to emphasize in our thinking and in the way we approach work is it's not only these end products, it's actually the policies and procedures for how you run services and facilities. So if you're an HPC facility, the way you allocate time or the way a user is onboarded and the particular rules and steps you have for that, as well as the interfaces for doing that, affect the whole user experience. And I also like to emphasize, as part of the entire scientific software product lifecycle, thinking about the UX of your own work and your own tools and everything is important. If you're curious about UX in a broader sense, there will be an upcoming blog post series on the Better Scientific Software website. Next slide, please. So what has changed since the last summit? I'll be upfront. This is, I think, both Laila and my first time attending the summit, but having looked at the past reports and everything, it's nice to see that user experience is being recognized and is included here as a topic and a breakout. Something that I don't think is really new, but is always important for user experience is really the sprawl of systems and interfaces. As we've, I think, seen from the conversations yesterday and the lightning talk just now, with increased heterogeneity among facilities and types of systems, both, in one nation and globally. There's a lot that makes it difficult for the interfaces among workflow systems to be usable and to make uh, doing scientific work, I guess, challenging. And then AI and ML and the data problem that I think is, LLMs have become the hot topic as everyone has been discussing. I think AI and ML in science is just inescapable, especially if you're in the Department of Energy landscape. Um, but the part of that that I actually find interesting from a human perspective is the data curation issue and the effect that has on the ability of AI ML systems to be adopted as part of workflows or workflows to influence those. Curation has long been a challenge for scientists, especially in the more data-rich domains. But I think there's a lot of UX problems that should receive more effort if we're going to enable AI and ML tools to work better. Next slide, please. So some current challenges I'll just briefly hit on the ecosystem level. As I noted, workflow systems are already many and varied, and there's this global challenge of, both geographically and cross-domain, that there are lots of facilities and services that aren't always well interconnected or integrated, and that is just not only a hard technical problem, or maybe even not even a hard technical problem, but just a challenging social and political problem. I'm partially involved in the DOE IRI initiative that has been brought up multiple times, and a lot of the work there is really not hard technically, like federated identity, but it's a huge social and political problem. And I think it's important is at a high level, if we're going to think about AI, ML experiences in heterogeneous environments, how do we design these for more seamless interactivity? And I'll pass it off to Laila.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about getting people interested in workflows in the first place. Like I don't have to sell anyone here on workflows, I'm guessing. But there's still many people who string together tools and run them one by one, while they could be benefiting a lot on using workflows in many ways. And like reasons people may stray away from workflows is that they appear too technical and too complex, but also that people are just used to other methods, used to the single tools that they're running, and do not know that these can be integrated into workflows to maybe pre-process the data or process them with other tools in conjunction to the main tools that they're running. Next slide, please. And another UX issue is a bit of a black box issue. So if you're developing a workflow, this is not that much of an issue, I think. This mostly affects end users, but also if you're developing workflows a bit, is that how the workflow processes this data can be very intransparent to you. So if the workflow fails, it can be very hard to track down this problem, like if your data is the issue or at what point the workflow fails. If the UX of tracing this back is not very good. But also, if the workflow succeeds and everything is happening in a black box, then there's little that you can take away from this to maybe adapt the workflow to work in other workflows or to work with other data. Next slide, please. Yeah, and some potential solutions for this is that improving how easy and accessible workflows are. That using a workflow from an end user's experience should be just like using a tool. So there shouldn't be too much of a barrier to entry to install additional software or configure additional parameters. It should just be your usual inputs and get your outputs. And another solution is to transition people from stringing together their individual tools to actually using workflows by facilitating this. So there are some solutions which record what tools you used with what parameters. And this is just like a small step away from actually building a workflow so that we can extract this history of what tools were used in what manner and put this into a workflow that can be rerun as many times as one wants. And for the black box issue, is that as running a workflow should be as easy as building a workflow. So there should be like graphical representations on how these steps are processed and intercepting these steps and looking at what data flows from one step to the next. And I think that graphical interfaces are especially important here because just seeing a list of outputs, it can be very hard to connect this back to the structure of a workflow. Next slide, please.
And I'll briefly mention, I know we're running out of time, one last potential solution, and that is the notion of design systems, which have become quite common in the commercial software industry over the last decade or so. A design system effectively is a set of templates, code, and guidelines that help teams more easily craft user interfaces of different types and the overall experience so that they behave consistently across product lines and different environments. In the scientific space, there are a few efforts related to this or actually creating scientific design systems. So I think a lot of the science gateways and data portal patterns that we see are a generally related notion that if designed and tested with users become a way to help improve the experience with a workflow. The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative actually has a science design system they have open sourced that they use for all of the products that their staff are building. I will note it's very biology oriented, which may or may not be useful to a lot of workflows. And then briefly, the Strudel project out of Berkeley Lab and UC Berkeley is creating a design system based specifically for scientific user interfaces based on a lot of our experiences as a team building, especially web-based UIs that have a lot of similarities for all very different domains from, energy optimization systems to, earth sciences systems. And so we developed this notion of task flows as a way to capture the visual series of steps that might be represented in a workflow system as a DAG underneath. So that is an effort that we're currently building as an open source project. So next slide, please. And just to conclude, since we're a little over time, a few of the topics for discussion that we came up with, one, there was a charge question asking, what examples are of maybe good UX or UIs from the community. I think it'd be interesting to hear about what backend resources or processes that affect workflows people have experience with. As far as a workflow system itself, what parts of the experience are most difficult today? Is it setup configuration? Is it the developer experience? Challenges, based on what we've talked about here, what did we miss or get wrong? And then thinking towards the short and long term, maybe for short term to build support for improving workflow, UX, and user interfaces, identifying common pain points and helping identify best design practices. For the long term, I think it's interesting to think about how do we improve the actual user experience of collaboration and interaction between humans, machines, which I would include AI, ML systems as kind of a part of the machine for the end user, and the facilities themselves, the high performance computing facilities or other research infrastructure systems. So with that, I'll hand it back to Stephen.